Imagine reaching the age of 92 and still walking out onto a stage where tens of thousands are waiting, still holding a guitar that's older than some of your fans, still singing with a voice that sounds more like a prayer than a performance. Most people at that age have long retreated into rest, but Willie Nelson is not most people. He is the last outlaw standing, the poet of the broken road, and the quiet rebel whose scars sing louder than any applause. But here's the twist. Behind that warm smile and weathered voice is a story that's not just about music. It's about survival, about betrayal, about a man who stared at loss again and again, and instead of collapsing, turned pain into melody. Every heartbreak became a verse. Every failure became a chord. Every ghost he's ever carried found its way into a song. And the result? A soundtrack that doesn't just belong to him. It belongs to America. Think about it. When we hum on the road again, we're not just humming a tune about highways. We're humming about freedom, exile, resilience, and the strange beauty of never fully belonging. Crazy. Or Roy Orbison sang Pretty Paper. Those weren't just hits. They were fragments of Willie's own soul, sold for survival, and echoed through the voices of others. He gave away pieces of himself long before the world even knew his name. And yet, his story is not a neat one. It isn't the typical Hollywood rise from rags to riches. In fact, at times, it looked like he would never rise at all. As a child abandoned by both parents, as a young man rejected by Nashville, as a superstar chased by the IRS, and as an old man burying his son, his sister, and his closest friends. Willie's life has been a storm, but the strange thing about storms is that sometimes they carve the landscape into something unforgettable. This is the story of how a skinny kid from Abbott, Texas, who once picked cotton under the punishing sun and nearly gave up on life entirely, became the last voice of a generation, the final highwayman. It's not just about his music, it's about what it means to endure, to keep walking when the world shuts its doors, to keep singing when grief takes away the breath. Tonight, we're not just talking about Willie Nelson, the country legend. We're talking about the man who turned disgrace into dignity, ruin into resilience, and silence into songs that millions still carry in their hearts. His life is not simply history, it is testimony. A testimony that whispers to us, even now, sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply to keep going. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not only the story of Willie Nelson, it's the story of how music itself can become a form of survival, and how one man's scars became America's soundtrack before he was a legend. Willie Nelson was a forgotten child in Abbott, Texas, born in 1933 in the shadow of the Great Depression. His life began with absence. His mother walked out first, leaving no trace. His father soon remarried and disappeared, too. For Willie and his sister Bobby, it wasn't death that made them orphans. It was abandonment. Their parents were alive somewhere, but simply chose not to stay. That kind of rejection doesn't vanish. It leaves an echo. The children were raised by their grandparents, kind but poor, who did their best to stitch together a sense of family. Their grandfather, a blacksmith, placed a guitar in Willie's tiny hands, not knowing it would become his lifelong lifeline. But when pneumonia claimed his grandfather's life, Willie was only 6 years old. Another anchor was gone, for a boy who had already lost so much. It felt like the world itself was pulling away. In his autobiography, Willie would later reflect that separation from his parents felt worse than death, because they were still out there, just not interested. Imagine being a child who cries not because his parents are gone, but because they chose to live elsewhere. That wound became the undertone of his music. By 7, Willie wasn't clinging to toys. he was clinging to chords. At 9, he was performing in local bars, singing gospel in church, playing with small bands, pouring his loneliness into melody. Every stage he stood on wasn't just a performance, it was a plea to be heard. While other boys played marbles, Willie strummed his guitar like it was oxygen. If you listen closely to his music even decades later, you can hear that ache. Songs like Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain carry not just heartbreak, but the memory of a boy who knew love could vanish at any moment. His lyrics weren't just crafted, they were lived, and that's why they connect across generations. His childhood wasn't only marked by grief, but by hard labor under the brutal Texas sun. Willie picked cotton with bleeding fingers, earning pennies to help his family survive. Hunger wasn't just an empty stomach. It was a reminder that life was always one misstep from collapse. But through it all, the guitar remained. It couldn't replace parents or stop loss, but it could quiet the storm inside him. That's the true beginning of Willie Nelson's story. A boy abandoned, a child scarred, who found in music not just a hobby but survival. And perhaps that's why his songs resonate so deeply, because they don't just tell stories. They carry the voice of someone who learned far too early that the world can leave you behind. And the only way to endure is to keep singing. The Texas sun has a way of shaping people. For a teenage Willie Nelson, it wasn't just sunlight, it was punishment. He bent over cotton fields with blistered fingers and an aching back, trying to scrape together survival. By the time he was 14, he had already cycled through more jobs than most adults. Tree trimmer, encyclopedia salesman, nightclub bouncer, disc jockey. He scrubbed dishes, patched saddles, climbed telephone poles, even tried selling expensive book sets to families who could barely afford food. None of it gave him stability, but all of it toughened him. Still, there was only one thing that truly mattered: music. At night, he played in bars, spinning records by day at small-town radio stations. Yet Nashville, the city every aspiring country artist dreamed of, seemed to have no place for him. Producers said his voice was too raw, his look too ordinary. He wasn't polished enough for their world of rhinestones and radio-friendly perfection. Doors closed in his face again and again. The rejection nearly broke him. In his 20s, living in a rundown trailer on the edge of a cemetery near Nashville, Willie sank into despair, drinking heavily, crushed by constant failure. He reached a moment of darkness few knew about until much later. One night, he lay down in the middle of a busy road, hoping traffic might erase him. Cars swerved, none stopped, and when he finally got up, he wasn't triumphant, just numb. He later admitted he didn't know if he was disappointed or relieved. That was the closest he came to giving up. But something inside him refused to die. With no money and nowhere to go, he tried hitchhiking to Portland to find his mother. When no car stopped, he curled up in a ditch, soaked by rain, with only his guitar beside him. A stranger finally offered him a ride and $10 for a bus ticket. That small act of kindness kept him moving. These years became Willie's personal storm. No fame, no recognition, just endless nights of smoke-filled bars and empty pockets. But out of that storm came clarity. If no one else would give him a voice, he'd create one anyway. His songs became the only currency he had, his guitar the only companion he could count on. That's the paradox of rejection. Nashville dismissed him as too rough, too strange, too unmarketable. But in that dismissal, Willie found freedom. Freedom to keep writing, keep playing, and keep surviving, even when the world wasn't listening. By the late 1950s, Willie Nelson had endured enough rejection to sink most aspiring musicians. But while Nashville kept its doors shut, he kept scribbling lyrics late into the night, crafting songs that carried more truth than polish. His breakthrough came not as a singer, but as a songwriter, a ghostwriter for other people's fame. One of his earliest gems was Family Bible, inspired by memories of his grandmother singing hymns around the dinner table. Desperate for cash, Willie sold the rights for just $100. The song became a radio hit, praised for its purity and timelessness. But the name on the record wasn't his. It was a cruel foreshadowing of what was to come. His words celebrated, his voice ignored. Then came Crazy, a haunting ballad that Patsy Cline transformed into one of the greatest jukebox hits of all time. Funny how time slips away. Found its way to Billy Walker. Pretty Paper became Roy Orbison's Christmas classic. These weren't just songs, they were pieces of Willie's heart, disguised under other names. To the average listener, Willie Nelson was invisible. His words shaped a generation, yet he walked the streets unrecognized. Producers dismissed him whenever he tried to record his own tracks. They said his voice was too rough, too nasal, too unpolished for radio. They wanted rhinestones and clean-cut crooners. Willie gave them braids, a weary smile, and gravel in his tone. What they heard as imperfection was, in truth, the very soul of country music. But Nashville wasn't ready for authenticity. It wanted conformity. Imagine the frustration, writing the very songs that launched other careers, while being told your own voice didn't belong. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. For every chart-topping hit he wrote, there was another door slammed in his face. Yet, in those years of invisibility, Willie was sharpening something greater than fame. He was learning that music didn't need polish to matter. It needed truth. And when truth finally found its stage, Nashville wouldn't be able to contain him. Looking back, it's almost poetic that his career began in shadows, because Willie Nelson would later embody the outlaw movement, the idea that real music doesn't beg for approval. It dares to exist. Without those years of being dismissed, he might never have found the courage to build his own stage, on his own terms. In the end, Nashville's cold shoulder became his fuel. Every no he received turned into another verse. Every rejection taught him to rely not on gatekeepers, but on the only constant he had ever known: his guitar, his scars, and his stubborn refusal to quit. By the early 1970s, Willie Nelson had almost given up on Nashville. His ranch in Ridgetop had burned down. His marriage was crumbling, and his career seemed finished. But instead of surrender, he went back to Texas. What he found there wasn't failure, it was freedom. Austin was nothing like Nashville. In smoky bars and backyard stages, long-haired hippies sat beside rodeo cowboys, and no one cared about polish. They cared about honesty. Here, Willie's raw, unpolished sound finally made sense. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He was the heartbeat of a new movement, Outlaw Country. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie, an unapologetic album that didn't beg for approval. Critics didn't know what to make of it, but fans connected instantly. 2 years later came Red-Headed Stranger, a sparse concept album that Nashville executives called unmarketable. Yet it became a multi-platinum masterpiece, cementing Willie as a cultural icon. That same year, alongside Waylon Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer, he helped create Wanted, The Outlaws, the first country record to ever go platinum. Nashville had once rejected him. Now he was leading a revolution. But with success came scandal. Willie's personal life was as stormy as his music was steady. He was still married to singer Shirley Colley when an envelope arrived at their home, a hospital bill for the birth of a child. The mother wasn't Shirley. It was Willie's girlfriend, Connie. The revelation ended his marriage and stained his reputation. Though he later married Connie, it was a pattern that seemed to follow him. Professional triumph paired with personal turmoil. The outlaw image wasn't just a marketing strategy. It mirrored his life: fires, divorces, broken promises, and restarts seemed to haunt him at every turn. Yet somehow, every time life burned him down, he came back stronger. What made this era unforgettable wasn't just the music. It was the way Willie redefined what it meant to be an artist. He grew his hair, smoked what he pleased, and played the guitar his way. He didn't chase Nashville anymore. He forced Nashville to chase him, and in doing so, he became more than a country star. He became a symbol of rebellion, of truth, of survival. By the late 1980s, Willie Nelson seemed untouchable. He had reshaped country music, sold millions of records, and become a household name. But just as his career reached new heights, a letter arrived that would unravel nearly everything he'd built. The IRS claimed he owed a staggering $16.7 million in unpaid taxes. Years of bad financial advice, blind trust in managers, and complicated accounting had caught up with him. In 1990, federal agents raided his properties. They seized his ranch, his recording equipment, even threatened to take Trigger, his beloved guitar. For Willie, it wasn't just about money. It felt like watching his life boxed up and carried out the door. Many artists would have crumbled under the weight of that kind of debt. Willie found another way. Instead of hiding, he turned to the only thing he ever relied on: music. In 1992, he recorded the IRS tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, a stripped-down album sold directly to fans. No studio gloss, no big marketing push, just Willie, his guitar, and his story. Late-night infomercials advertised the record, and fans responded. They bought it not out of pity, but out of loyalty. They remembered how his songs had carried them through heartbreak and loneliness. Now they carried him. Slowly, dollar by dollar. The mountain of debt shrank. By the mid-1990s, most of it was gone. But financial ruin wasn't the hardest blow Willie would face. In 1991, his firstborn son, Billy, died tragically at just 33. Willie later admitted it was the most devastating pain of his life, something no song could soften. Every Christmas afterward carried a shadow. Fans said they could hear it in his voice, a weight behind every lyric, a pause where joy used to be. The losses didn't stop there. In 2020, his lifelong drummer and friend Paul English passed away. 2 years later, Willie's sister Bobby, his first duet partner and closest companion, also died. Then in 2024, Chris Christopherson, his Highwayman brother, was gone too. Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings had already left years before. Willie, once part of a legendary brotherhood, now stood alone as the last Highwayman. Yet through it all, he kept singing. That was his form of survival. Whether staring down the IRS or burying loved ones, Willie refused to retreat. He turned grief into melody, debt into verse, and despair into something his fans could hold on to. Resilience wasn't just part of his story, it was his story. Willie Nelson has always looked like a man carved from the road itself. Braids, weathered skin, eyes that carried both mischief and sorrow. But behind the smile and stage presence, his body has been waging its own war for decades. The truth is, Willie's health struggles began almost as early as his music. He was only 6 when he traded eggs from his family's chicken coop for packs of Camel cigarettes. That childhood habit became a shadow that followed him for most of his life. Cigarettes claimed the lives of his parents and step-parents, and nearly claimed his own. Years of smoking left him battling emphysema, a slow, suffocating disease that erodes the lungs. By the time he was in his 80s, Willie had endured a collapsed lung, multiple bouts of pneumonia, and whispers that he would finally retire. But true to form, he adapted. He quit tobacco. He gave up smoking marijuana, long part of his outlaw identity, and shifted to edibles instead. In 2015, he even underwent stem cell treatment to repair lung tissue. And though his voice grew thinner, his breath shorter, he never stepped fully away from the stage. He always came back. Those closest to him say his resilience is more than stubbornness. It's purpose. His son Lucas once explained, "For every scar on his lungs, there's a verse he's written in its place." At an age when most count pills and doctor's appointments, Willie counts down to his next show, even when he moves slower, even when his hands tremble. There's still that unmistakable twinkle in his eyes, the spark of a man who refuses to stop singing. Yet health is only part of the story. In recent years, Willie has also carried the weight of being the last highwayman. Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, Chris Christopherson, one by one, they left. What remains is Willie alone on stage, the final witness to a brotherhood that defined outlaw country. When he sings now, it isn't just his voice the audience hears. It's the echoes of all those who once stood beside him. At 92, every performance feels like both a concert and a eulogy. But if there's sorrow in that, there's also power, because Willie Nelson hasn't allowed illness, grief, or time itself to silence him. Instead, he's turned each limitation into testimony. He is more than a musician. He's living proof that even when breath becomes fragile, spirit can remain unbreakable. Willie Nelson's story is more than the journey of a country music star. It's the story of a boy abandoned, a man rejected, and an artist who refused to let silence win. From cotton fields in Texas to outlaw stages in Austin, from IRS seizures to hospital rooms, from family funerals to standing ovations, he has lived through storms that would have broken almost anyone else. Yet at 92, Willie still steps into the light, guitar in hand, offering songs that carry not just melody, but memory. His music is not polished perfection. It never was. It's cracked, raw, and human, and maybe that's why it resonates so deeply. Because life itself isn't perfect. Life is scars, betrayals, debts, and losses that we carry quietly. Willie never hid his imperfections. He sang them. In doing so, he gave millions of people permission to face their own hardships and still keep moving. Think about it. When he lost nearly everything to the IRS, he didn't retreat. He recorded the IRS tapes in a stripped-down studio and sold it directly to fans. When he buried his son Billy, he didn't stop performing. He turned grief into quieter, heavier notes that audiences could feel in their bones. When his health collapsed, he didn't vanish, he adapted, slowed down, and kept showing up anyway. For Willie, survival has never been about denying pain. It's been about transforming it. And now, as the last highwayman, he carries not only his own legacy, but also the echoes of Waylon, Johnny, and Chris. Every time he sings, it's not just Willie Nelson you're hearing. It's an entire generation of outlaws who dared to sound different, to live free, and to remind the world that authenticity matters more than approval. What lesson do we take from all this? It's not simply to admire Willie's resilience. It's to recognize that resilience is available to all of us. His songs are proof that even when the world says no, you can create your own yes. That loss doesn't have to be an ending. It can be a verse. That failure doesn't mean silence. It can be the start of a new song. So the next time you hear "On the Road Again" or "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain," don't just hear a tune. Hear the story of a boy who was left behind and found his way forward. Hear the story of a man who carried ghosts but kept singing anyway. Hear the testimony of someone who taught us that music, and maybe life itself, isn't about perfection. It's about endurance. And perhaps that's why Willie Nelson is still here. Not because he avoided storms, but because he learned how to turn them into songs. His voice, thinner now but still unshakable, reminds us that some hearts never stop beating, some roads never truly end, and some stories, like Willie's, are too powerful to fade. So let me leave you with a question. If Willie Nelson can carry 92 years of scars and still walk on stage with a smile, what's stopping us from turning our own pain into something that sings?